the recording. All right. Disha and Minaz, can we begin?
Yes, sure.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining today. So this is the third talk in the series. I am Manav. I'll be hosting the talk today. And today's talk is a part of the Water Classrooms project that the Living Waters Museum is uh, doing in collaboration with TESF. And this series is part of the series is called Unraveling Sustainability and Education, where we look at the various aspects of sustainability and education, and how we can um, upskill ourselves using its different aspects. I'll quickly introduce Living Waters Museum and TESF. The Living Waters Museum, LWM, started at the Center for Heritage Management at Ahmedabad University, and but we are now currently based at the Indian Institute of Science Education and Research at Pune, and is embedded in the Center for Water Research. We are also the founder member of the Global Network of Water Museums, which has been endorsed by UNESCO's International Hydrology Program. Uh, LWM is a virtual museum which engages youth in visualizing water heritage and reimagining sustainable, inclusive, and equitable water futures. We use the power of storytelling and technology through which we seek to celebrate our water wisdom and inspire youth to look at water from an interdisciplinary lens and co-build a digital repository that can serve as a source of learning. In March 2022, we had launched an exhibition on Pune's waters called Pune Pani. And many from IISER Pune and outside had participated in the physical events, which involved panel discussions and workshops, and also a cultural event and during its launch week. Last year, we also started a collaboration with Transforming Education for Sustainable Futures, TESF, which is a research network under the UK Global Challenges Research Fund, and is anchored by the University of Bristol. It has hubs in India, Rwanda, South Africa, Somalia, and Somaliland. And in collaboration with the India hub of TESF at the Indian Institute of Human Settlements, and Living Waters Museum has started, along with other partners like the Center for Environment Education, and also the Science Activity Center here at IISER Pune. We are developing water classrooms for middle school students, which are 6th standard to 8th standard. And what we intend to do is to develop pedagogical tools which are interactive and also visually rich. And what we aim to do is to give different perspectives on approaching water, let it be physical, sociological, geographical, cultural. So we look at water from the different perspectives. And what we these tools are intended to inspire kids. Can you mute yourselves? So we intend to inspire the kids to solve or to enable to look at the water problems of sustainable and resilient water futures creatively. And these classrooms is developed by a very diverse team of professionals, like academics, filmmakers, artists, educators, students themselves, and each of them, everyone is learning from each other, and which adds to the richness of the project. And this talk series is started to look and share it more ideas of knowledge related to education and sustainability. Today, we look at how storytelling and stories can be a very powerful tool to engage with children, and what resources that we can use as educators, or as anyone who has tried their hand at teaching kids, to engage them more. And today we have Disha and Minaz with us, who will be giving the talk. I'll Before I hand over to Disha and Minaz, I'll quickly introduce them to the audience, and then Minaz can take over, I think. So Disha is a neurobiologist, artist, and illustrator. Her close kinship with nature as a child directed her into taking science and arts. She works with different mediums on various themes with a focus on nature, people, and science, and trying to understand their relationship with each other. She has also authored and I think also illustrated the Whispers of a River book, which we had presented during the LWM event during Pune Pani. Minaz is an architect and urban designer, teacher and explorer. She designs, researches, mentors, and writes. Fascinated by the magic of storytelling, she attempts to incorporate storytelling as a tool in her interactions with students at Rizvi College of Architecture, where she's a professor. She has authored Nesting in Nature, Sanjay Patil, a monograph on the architect's work, and Pani Party, a children's picture storybook to create awareness around water. So these are the speakers, and I hope you all have a lot of fun. We'll keep questions to the end of each speaker's talk. So you can also put your questions in the chat. We will take them up. So over to you, Minaz.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Manav, and thank you all those who are part of this entire process of putting together water classrooms and creating a dialogue around water and reaching out to the youth and children with the message to understand and value water. Unfortunately, my camera is impacted by water. The moisture in Bombay is extremely high, and my screen is, I mean, my camera is not too clear. So I will after a while shut it off. And I have a short presentation about the whole impact which I feel storytelling has on our lives, and how it has been used in Pani Party to reach out to children to make them understand the value of around water. So, Chavi, I need your help to share the screen.
Minaz, let me know if it's visible.
Yeah, just a minute. I hope you all can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can.
So you can go next. So I'm like I said today, I would like to celebrate the joy of storytelling, and go next. And the miracle of water, and how they both have come together through this one book. Next. I'm starting with an image of a, a small village in during the time of the Vedic civilization, which was a few thousand years back. And the whole idea of exchanging stories around the hearth. This was a time when there was the written word was not really around, at least with the common people, but people were connected through stories, and the heart became like a meeting point where people came together and shared, perhaps, what did I do, where did I go and farm, what new produce I found, what new animal I saw, and so on and so forth. So stories have always been around, and as a human race we have been individually and collectively shaped by these stories of our times. Next. So even if we go back to the times of the Vedas, where again a whole philosophy, a whole religious concept, a way of life was being put together in the form of a poem, like a rhyme, and a sort of a story. And then later there were these 18 Puranas which also talked about uh, the stories of that time, and it gave it they still continue to give us a lot of insight into what the things we believe to be right or wrong. They color our experiences and they outline our worldview. So mythology, which has been the mainstay in all religions, has always been taken forward through storytelling, oral storytelling, and now written storytelling. Can we go next? I think someone's mic is on. Uh, so this whole process from shruti, which is just hearing or learning by hearing, to smriti, which is understanding and perhaps memorizing. Next, to anubhuti, which is feeling and experiencing. Next, to akruti, which is shaping something. Is what our human mind is capable of. And a lot of the akruti happens through the shruti and the smriti and the anubhuti of the stories around us. Yes, we can go to the next slide. So India, I believe, is the land of storytellers. I mean, storytelling is everywhere around us. If you look at, the Katputli or next, the Kathakali dance and many other dance forms, they are all based on narrating a certain story, a folk tale through the medium of perhaps puppetry or dance drama or music. Next. So you also have the Dastan Gois who have a certain method, a certain way of storytelling. Next. The Kawad artists who narrate stories through their the props that they have. And finally, next, various other folk musicians who travel from place to place narrating folk tales. So storytelling has always been very integral to the Indian culture. Can we go next? So beyond oral storytelling, there has been the advent of books and various books, not restricted to our geography, but from across the world, have mesmerized generations with the stories that they have carried. And fables, legends, the ideas of morals and ethics, all of these have somehow come about from the stories that we hear around us. Next. The impact of performing arts, Indian theater, even other forms of theater, cinema. Today we have even newer formats on our television, on our phones, or the OTT platforms. We are flooded with stories, all the time, and they definitely have an impact on the way we, the way they become a part of our memories, the way they define our notions and. Uh, the way they make us participate in uh, something which is happening in someone else's life. Yes, next. So I remember as a child, Amar Chitra Katha and Panchatantra and other Indian folk tales were so impactful in being able to give a glimpse into history, into mythology, and connecting a child with not only other human beings but stories of animals, stories around nature, and the impact that it leaves is quite significant. Next. So who are the custodians of the storytelling? Most often it is parents, and more than parents, it is grandparents. Many of us will have memories of spending time with our grandparents, listening to stories which often sometimes stem from folk tales, from mythology, from local stories. Every region has their local stories, and grandparents somehow also turn into impromptu storytellers, weaving a tale for their grandchildren on the spur of the moment. But other than grandparents, there is one more set of people who play a very large part in storytelling. Can we go next? So here we are talking about the role of teachers and how they can enchant I think someone's mic is on.
You can
Okay.
go ahead.
So not only by like narrating a story, but as you can see, enacting the story, look at the expressions of the children, how involved they are, and how connected they are, and how connected the teacher is also to this entire process. Somehow the story is making that entire group come together as one and be a part of that experience. Yes, next. So moving on to this little project that we did a couple of years back with the Living Waters Museum. So we were working on this exhibition for mapping the narratives of Mumbai's waters. So that the title of the exhibition was Mumbai Water Narratives. And when we looked at the spectrum of people we wanted to reach out to, I mean, it was always the academics and the researchers and people interested adults would from various faculties would definitely go and see the exhibition, but we felt that it was very important to reach out to children because they are the water keepers of the future, and including them in this narrative, making them understand the value of water at a young age becomes a very imperative. So the idea of this book came about, and I wrote this book. Priyanka illustrated it, and we had a People Place project, which is a publication team working on meaningful publications around the city, various layers of the city. So they came forth to publish the book. And every time we reached out to children with either a virtual or a physical book reading session, it was always not just a book reading, but a party. So we always told them to come to the party and get with them also a glass of drinking water, which made the entire uh, session take a different turn altogether. Can we go next? Next. So, as you would have seen, the protagonists in the story are this little boy, Aryan, and his grandfather. And the story was set in the lockdown. It was written and worked upon in the 2020 lockdown. And it spoke about how the first few pages of this storybook were only about building the background of what this child was going through, the kind of boredom he was going through, where he lived, what he did or didn't do during the lockdown. Can we go next? uh, yes, this was all the description. Next. Then his imagination was triggered when he thought of how it would be fun to have a birthday party with a friend of his. Next. And then the grandfather turned the situation around by saying that we'll have a pani party, and that's where the entire focus shifted on water. So if you go to the next slide, I will just read a line or two from here, and it's basically it could be something out of a textbook, uh, because it is talking about various aspects of water. But it is, the only thing is, it is being told as part of the story, and making the child imagine the whole uh, picture around him. So it says, can you imagine that you can drink and eat and also use it for cooking? What if I say that you can also swim in, ski in, and sail on the same thing? And imagine an element in which all kinds of life exist: corals, seaweed, fish of all shapes and sizes, crabs, turtles, and octopi. So it is somewhere triggering the imagination of the kid. Can we go next? So that continues further when the grandfather is trying to tell him about the forms of water, where it can form drops, waves, snowflakes, ice cubes. It can flow, it can evaporate, it can fall back from the sky. So you're somewhere trying to explain the water cycle. And the illustrations played a very big role in helping a child imagine the whole thing, and making the entire thing very vivid and exciting. Can we go next? Next. Again, the whole idea of the Earth being the only blue planet on the solar system. So the whole thought was Aryan and his grandpa, sitting in a space shuttle and taking a tour of the solar system, so that they figure out that there's only one blue planet. And the whole idea of the fact that over 60% of our body is composed of water, and without water, we will perish. So all of this could be something which perhaps I have also read in a textbook, and it got put together and conveyed through a story format. And more than anything else, we also wanted to make children think about where their water comes from, and does everybody have a similar situation, or is there disparity when it comes to water supply? Because we do reach out to children in schools who perhaps have only seen water coming from a tap. They have water in their homes 24 hours a day, and for them it's a very given thing that, okay, I have water, so what? So this whole idea, this is so that that we often take this magic for granted. So sometimes it's nice to sit down and celebrate this magic, isn't it? And if we go to the next page, the grandfather talks about the fact that many people around the world do not have access to clean water, and these include those who live around us in our own city. So this is something which makes a person ponder that, is this really true? And when he asks that what can I do to change that, the grandfather says that start valuing what we already have. And the fact that we forget at the miracles that exist around us. So somehow inculcating that whole idea of gratitude for things that we already possess and we take for granted was something the story was trying to convey. So like, once we focus on this miracle, we will learn to value every drop of water on the planet and not waste it. Can we go next? Yeah, so we can keep scrolling till the book ends. So we often continued the storytelling session with more slides beyond that, because by now the students or the children were thinking, they were wondering what is happening around the supply of water, and they were also kind of looking at water from many different lenses. The whole miracle of water, the fact that the planet Earth is the only blue planet, the fact that we are made up of water. So many new concepts were being introduced to these children. So beyond that, if can we go next? So then there was some discussion opened out around facts, that if this is the the whole percentage of water that Earth has, and the liquid fresh water is only that little dot, and fresh water from lakes and rivers is even lesser. So you start understanding ratios. Yeah, it's given also at the base. Yes. Can we go next? Then we were addressing a lot of kids in Bombay. So we talked about where the water in Bombay comes from. So the fact that, we live in this little island at the, left corner, and the water is coming from distances which are 107 kilometers away. And what is happening to the people who live around those regions? Are we taking their water away? Are we taking their livelihoods away if they are associated with water? So these are things then, which can make the conversation more towards the tangible aspects of water. Next. So all these slides that I'm showing after the story were also part of the Living Waters Museum exhibition on Mumbai water narratives. So this was done around water scarcity, the whole mapping by Pani Hak Samiti. So the conversation about, we can go onwards. How much water do people living in the slums get every day? So they are getting only 45 liters The apartment buildings are supposed to get 135 liters. They are spending perhaps double of that. We are going and swimming in pools, which are consuming a lot of water. And whereas on the other end, on not on the other end, but right, somewhere close to us, there are people who are struggling every day, paying a lot of money to buy this water. Next. And the disparity between children, at a time when children should be going to school, there are so many kids who miss school because they have to fill water. I have personally experienced this, where children run away from activity sessions and all because they have to go and fill water. And it's quite cruel to know that 6 kilometers a day they are walking, uh, just to fill water. But all these questions which are more grave, stem once you start understanding the value of water. So the introduction to these topics happens through storytelling. Next. So this was one of the entries for this the Water We Want exhibition, which Living Waters Museum had submitted. And whereas people, there's so many kids who had drawn all very picturesque forms of water. This is what came from one child. When you say draw something on water, this is what they visualize, because this is what water means to them. Next. Next. So just to in a nutshell, stories are engaging, playful, and immersive. They help hold our attention, and they also make us part of the narrative. We become Aryan, or we become his grandfather. We become the child who's deprived of water. We become the octopus and the fish swimming in the water. And it also triggers imagination. It triggers questions in the mind of a child, and it makes us participate in the issues that we have at hand, rather than being an outsider, rather than othering the problem and saying that that I cannot do anything about it. It's a very fluid way, so to say, to participate in what is happening. And they also shape our notions of what is right and what is wrong. uh, and finally, that is what shapes, outlines our worldview. And the most important thing I thing about stories, I feel, is it makes you wonder. It makes you travel to places you've never seen before. It makes you think, and like space and time somewhere dissolve, and you go into another realm, which is everything is possible. So that's what makes storytelling very, very important as a tool for the for building more connections in, not only, I would not say only a child, but everyone's minds. So yeah, I think that we are at the end of uh, the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Minaz. Do we have questions from the audience? We can take some questions now.
I don't know whether I should turn on my camera because it is quite dreadful.
Yes.
Sorry about this.
So we can take some questions if there are any.
Can you read it out for me?
I do not have. So Devesh asked, Minaz, could you please elaborate on the fact how to explain the ocean pollution via storytelling?
How to explain ocean pollution via storytelling? Okay, I'll have to write another book now. But there are many playful ways of doing it. Perhaps one very impactful way is uh, changing, or changing the protagonist to somebody who's experiencing it. So suppose we tell the children that you imagine you are an octopus, or their favorite, whatever they want to be, a dolphin or some whale or whatever, and you are swimming through water. So what do you see? And then start the conversation from there. Then talk about how perhaps two species are meeting, or one species caught up in something, and then what happens. So those are all triggers which can, children are very efficient storytellers, very effective storytellers. You just give them little, to chew on, and they will build stories faster than perhaps we can. Their minds are not so cynical and so filled with data which we perhaps don't need. So it's fun to do that with them. I
Um,
hope answers Debesh's question.
um, any more questions, or we'll move to Disha, and then we can take questions at the end. All right. If you have any questions during Disha's talk, you can raise your hands and we can take the questions in between. Over to you, Disha.
Thank you, Manav. Should I begin?
Yeah, you can start.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Minaz, also for such wonderful talk about storytelling and various aspects of storytelling, especially the history. I enjoyed that a lot. So good evening, everyone. I'll start with my screen. I hope you all can see my screen clearly. So
Yes.
I'll be talking today about storytelling in education in general, but taking example of this book that I worked with Living Water Museum and Waters Museum and Jivit Nadi, that is Living River Foundation, called Whispers of a River. This was part of exhibition Punyache Pani this year, and the whole team of Jivit Nadi and Living Waters Museum worked with me, helped me a lot, supported me a lot to bring this book in this form. Sorry. So I wanted to talk about storytelling, but I think Minaz has beautifully covered most of the aspects of storytelling. So I'll stick more about the story constructs and how we can build our own stories if you are trying to write a story, or even if you are just trying to work around different topics, or if you're a student, if you're a teacher. I think, like Minaj said, that teachers are already a storyteller. So I don't think they need to learn how to make story, but still knowing some bits is fun. So our brains are actually hardwired to think and express in terms of a beginning, middle, and end. This is how we humans function. We always try to have a beginning somewhere and end it. And most of the time we want happy ending, but anyhow, even if it's not a happy ending, we want kind of a closure. We look for that when we are discussing something or we are telling something. So the need, why and how the story came into the picture. So like Minaj said, that story was very earlier part, was always a part of Indian culture, but not just Indian culture, it's a part of universal culture. If you see all the kinds of caves throughout the world, they all have different kinds of carvings, and they all were kind of form of storytelling. It was the kind of expression of that time by the people who didn't had proper language evolved by that time. So storytelling is one of the major factor which initiated language, so that we can communicate better to other people what we were thinking, how we were feeling, and also to understand how the other person feel. So if you would have noticed, every day when you talk to other people, when you tell about your life, when you come home from work, you talk about how your day was, all that is form of story. Without realizing, we are always telling stories. For example, I'm going to tell you a story today about my book, which is already a storybook. So this is kind of the world we live in, because we humans need stories most of the times. So uh, when we talk about stories, there can be different types of stories: narratives, anecdotal, conversational, reflective stories. Narratives can be, like I said, when we tell other people about how we are feeling, or about our experiences, or about different kinds of incidents that happened with us. In same way, when you are reflecting about some earlier time, a past experience that has happened with you, then also most of the time unknowingly we take proceed of the story form. So here there is one image. I think I will better show my face here. So when you see this image, you see there is a graph kind of thing. So each and every story always have this high and low in its from the beginning to end. And in general, every story can be divided in this from exposition to end, but not necessarily. It can be having different forms as well. Sometimes it can be cycle as well, especially when we talk about journeys of a hero. Many people might be knowing about this theory, journey of a hero. So that is somewhat cyclic. Here I'm taking this example because this fits most of the general stories that we go through each and every day. So we will see Whispers of a River. I'm assuming that not all present here today would have read Whispers of a River. So I will be showing few pages and explaining how we have taken help of this kind of constructs in that book, and why we have done this, why each and every part of that story, why it is the way we have told it. And I hope that will make you interested in reading that book more. So talking about exposition. So whenever you are telling a story, you always begin with the background of story. You always tell what happened before that story. So when we talk about Whispers of a River, there was a reason that we wrote this story. There is a reason that why we worked on illustrations of the story and different kind of. The main reason behind it was not just to tell a story, but to give a kind of message, or whoever reads the book should take home a message, or should take home an inspiration or a thought to ponder upon when they have closed this book. Especially our whole focus was mainly on the kids, because we understand that some theories and some kind of information, the data, which might be a lot for students or kids, younger students, not for everyone. So what we can consume as an adult, these kids cannot consume it in the same format. But if you remember, you might have been having certain favorite teachers in your school time. And if you remember, if you try to recall, most of the favorite teachers for every one of us were the good storytellers. If you remember that the teachers who were making things easier for us, who didn't make the concept more cramming. Like if you are a science student, there are a lot of things which can be very difficult at certain time to understand or to learn. But if you understand the concept through a story, it's easy to remember, and also you can always understand it much more easily than reading the lot of data or lot of text. Same way, that was one of the inspiration that we had a kind of report, and we wanted to bring that to kids as well, not just to adults. And we wanted that they understand it in a fun way. So this was about why this Whispers of a River came. And the exposition was, it is a story about river, which is River Mula, which is meeting another river Ram in a river confluence. And we talk about this particular river as an example of how most of the rivers in India are having this kind of fate. And we talk about one river to set an example, so that kids can understand that how rivers can be different from each other, and yet they can have some similarity, and they understand the importance of river and saving its biodiversity, or understanding how it affects our life as well. Then comes inciting incident. So in every story, we talked about that how we set up a background through exposition. We give some information that what happened before the story is formed. Then we talk about an inciting incident. So every story has an inciting incident where we talk about what incited the main characters of that story to go further, or to think about, or to ask the questions they ask, or the why of the story, why, what is happening in that story, why it is happening. So this is inciting incident. So here in Whispers of a River, the inciting incident was that there is a river Mula, and then a bird which comes to the river. This bird is migratory bird, so it has migrated. And when it comes here, it meets the river, and we have personified river so that kids can empathize more with the river. So when we talk about story is a great way, as I said, to understand how other people also feel, not just how we feel to express that, but we can also understand how other people are feeling. So once you think of a river as a person, it's much more easier to understand its plight, to understand what problem it is having, to understand what can we do about it that way. So here, this inciting incident was this meeting between the bird wagtail and between river Mula. One wonderful thing here was, as I'm telling this about book, we were working in a group. One of the person in our group was expert in the migratory birds in this particular area. And he suggested us why we should take this particular bird, which is yellow wagtail, because this is one bird which comes every year to this river. So when we are talking and when we were naming this bird, we named it wagtail, so that when kids read it every time, they remember that there is a bird which is existing and real, which is wagtail. And then they don't have to memorize which are the migratory birds coming in this area. At least they remember one bird which is part of that particular system, ecosystem, and comes every year and goes every year. So they understand this kind of thing much more easily, and they understand what is migratory bird. So one simple thing here was introducing to them a new bird, a new species of a bird, just by putting one character in that form. Second, next to inciting incident is rising action. So by rising action, we mean that there has to be one action, after that incident, what incites in the person, what incites in the main character, what it incites in the main character. So here in this book, when Mula and Wagtail meet, Wagtail's question incite a kind of, it kind of agitate Mula about what is happening to her, and her comparing her past and present. By this way, we also explain kids that how earlier the river was not so polluted, and what has happened in all this year, how it has changed, and how now it is much more polluted, and how it is making River Mula very sad. Also, when we are defining our characters, if you see, we are showing Wagtail, but we are not showing Mula. We are just indicating that there is a person or a humanified river. But why don't we show the face of the river? Is because this is something mystical. It's not exactly something, this is not something real, but we want kids to believe that nature is how it is, that how this is. They interact with each other, each and every element of nature interact with each other. And the river is something mysterious. So we show that it's a humanified river, but we are not showing the face. We leave that to imagination of kid. So this is one way of inciting interest, or inciting curiosity in kids, that how things can be, to push, to let them push their imagination a bit more, but not telling them or giving them whole data exactly, because kids are actually very intelligent. They just have the less patience than adults, and they also understand most of the things we tell them. If we are, even if it's in abstract form, and even if you are giving them in small pockets or small pockets of data instead of complete data together. Then we talk about the crisis in the story. So every story needs to have a crisis. So this crisis here was that these Mullah and Vectail is talking about what is the plight of the river Mullah and how it is they can understand about the invertebrate diversity in the Mullah River. And there is another introduction of a new character here, which is introduced called a girl, Hina. So the girl, Hina here is of the similar age of an audience. And this is helping them to understand that they are also part of that ecosystem or that nature that we are talking about. That river, which most of the kids nowadays don't see or have actually seen in their life. And the wagtails and other things, so that they understand that they are also equal part of it, and they, just like Hina, they can also interact with it if they wish to do. Then every story, apart from next to crisis, will have climax. So here the climax was that Hina is helping River Mullah and Wagtail to understand what is happening with different kinds of invertebrate which are present in River Mullah, and how this biodiversity is affecting rivers health, and how it's also a simplified way of teaching kids about the ecological balance that happens or that changes when we pollute a river, or when the river can do sorry yeah. So this is what the climax is. So I'm not showing all the pages of the books, but apart from this, we also introduced, after this, when Hina introduces River Mullah and Wagtail about different kind of freshwater invertebrates, we introduce slowly all the kinds of invertebrates and their types, and because we are also introducing them to their scientific names, and this species might be very new to the kids. It's not something which they see every day in their textbooks. So this was our way to ease them out to this introduction. Then talking about denouement. So when you have your climax that, okay, Hina is there to help River Mullah and Wagtail. So here you see we have like almost 3 heroes here. Mullah is there because it's her story. She is narrating it in the beginning. She is talking about her problems, and then Wagtail comes in, and Wagtail inside River Mullah to ask questions about herself. And then together they are trying to understand River Mullah. And introduction of Hina is something we are providing third person perspective to them, because this third person as in human perspective to them, that what humans understand about their water, about their ecosystem and other things. Also, there is one very interesting thing about Hina. We will talk about that later. So this denouement is explaining the climax, what is happening once the story has reached its climax, its end, and how it is like explaining to your own audience that why this has happened. We understand that now, and what we can do further. When you explain that, that is also equally important part of any story. Then talking about the end, this is here that it's a happy ending, that they understand what is the biodiversity of river and how it is affecting, how the zooplanktons present in river are affecting its health. So this is something to rejoice. They are rejoicing in that, and kids understand that this is how their friends, that is river and the nature, can be happy. So here we create a kind of curiosity. We create a kind of empathy towards the nature in kid, which they live very close by, but they are not interacting directly. But we hope with this they are inspired to understand this kind of living entities around them and try to understand them better. Now coming to characters. So whenever you are designing any story, it's very important how you design your different characters. You always have main characters, but it's not necessary that your story should have just one main character. It can have many, and it can have many supporting characters. You will need to read the book to understand that there were many more supporting characters here apart from Hina, River, and Wagtail. As I said, while Hina's character is very special, especially considering that that is the first human interaction that we bring in the story that is happening. The conversation was happening just between the river and Wagtail. Now we have brought human to interact with them, and that human, as I said, makes kids feel that okay, this is something that is very similar to us, and we can also be involved like this. Apart from that, when you name your character, so when we were, as I talked about the story behind naming Wagtail, why we named it Wagtail. Similarly, while we were naming this girl, young girl, we chose Hina because it shows that uh, most of the kids can relate to this name from different faiths also, even if not all. So we wanted to have them this understanding that it is not just uh, kids of one particular faith that can have this kind of interaction, but everyone. Nature is for everyone. Okay, so after this, I would like to explain one thing more, that when you are talking about this kind of stories, this story is was somewhere between having a lot of scientific data. It was a report, it was a scientific report which was turned into a story. So being from someone from science background, I always feel that the stories in the science background are more important because when you talk about science or any other subject like mathematics, part of the science, mathematics, physics, younger kids always think that it has to be something complicated or it has to be something boring. But you can always make it more interesting by start dividing it into beginning, middle, and end. So when you divide this, you have to have different characters and you have to show strength of each character in different parts. So in our story, Whispers of a River, in the beginning, the strength of the character of Mullah and Wagtail was most heaviest. Then in between came Hina, and her character became important. As I said, that our story was not just of one main character, but of many. And then in the third part, together, three of them try to sort their problems, try to solve their problem, figure out what is happening. And this is also kind of another thing that another way of telling kids that nature is something we can work with. We don't have to be scared of it. We don't have to worship it. We just have to be, we have just have to treat it equal to us. Because here the three of them are friends and not and almost equal to each other. So with equal intelligence, just that humans have more resources to understand things differently. So this is how we formed our story. So similarly, when you are talking about any science story, you can always divide them in this way, and the message can be conveyed to kids in a much more simpler way. So yeah, that was all my talk about. I hope this is something that will make you interested in reading the book. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Disha. That was actually fun. uh, actually looking at how to develop characters and
Thank you.
yes. Do we have any questions? You can raise your hands, unmute yourselves, and ask. You can also put in the chat if you want to.
Thank you, Minaz.
All right. I don't think there are questions from the audience. I think I'll open up the floor for anyone to ask questions to both Minaz and Disha. So one question like I had was how do you like when you're developing the story, how do you balance the society and the science part of it? So you want to convey some science information which is which is what is in the textbook, and the attempt here is to put it in a certain way. How do you balance how much of societal aspects you bring into it, and how much of the pure science you give in? Like, how do you balance these two?
I think when you are talking about any story, even if it's not just science, if something else is there apart from society, we humans are always craving for emotional attachments to things. So whatever it is, if it's science or something else, for example, we are talking about astronomy. If you give them something that they can connect to or empathize to or feel about, like that this can be me, or this character can be me, or this is some character which I know, someone, it seems like someone I know. In that way, you can always bring the society aspect and then showing their character, that how that person is, whether they are helping each other or if they are cruel, or you show different aspects of society. That way you bring part of society when we are showing human emotions, and rest of them is already the part that you want to convey message to. As I always say that we always talk about the main characters in the story. So we talked about here three main characters, but at the end of the day, story is not about those characters. It can be about anyone, but and most importantly, it's about the take-home message that anyone who is reading that book or reading that particular story takes home.
Okay. That's a question from Ritvi. Ritvi can unmute yourself.
Yeah, hello. So, there's a question for both of you. First of all, thank you for the really amazing talks. But you just mentioned that storytelling can be for anyone. It's not necessarily for kids, right?
Yes.
But both your talks focused on creating stories and educating kids via storytelling. So I was just wondering, how does storytelling itself change if your audience is more general, or like for adults or something like that?
Minaz, do you want to take this first, or should I?
Yes, perhaps, so I teach students of architecture who are, from the age group of say 18 or 19 to 22, 23. And we do use a lot of storytelling even there to kind of uh, get them acquainted with certain ideas. Like, in fact, yesterday in the humanities class, where we were doing Art Nouveau as a style in architecture, I did a reading of The Origin by Dan Brown. So sometimes the reference books just change to adapt to what is there. If it is to do say with the environment, then I may pick up some book which is connected to that and start reading out of that. But we also give a lot of references of cinema. So in fact, we were trying to introduce the navrasas, the various emotions that are there in the navrasa, and convert that into an abstract design. So the students were all given a set of movies to watch, mainstream Indian cinema to watch, and then derive, the rasas or the emotions out of that, and then translate that into design. So there are various ways of doing it, and like even presentation to the fraternity. I feel storytelling is a very uh, impactful tool. Getting in sometimes when you're presenting to say a group of adults, the first slide itself, if you get the person hooked as a participant in that narrative, if you make it personal, it becomes very easy for the person to connect to the issue you're talking about. So we are all very mesmerized by stories. It's not just children. That's what I would like to believe.
And I also think all the good stories are open for all the kinds of audiences.
Absolutely.
It can easily cross all age barriers. I'm pretty sure every one of us would be still enjoying a lot of children books, and children, when they grow up, they obviously read more books.
That's very interesting. Thank you.
So, I mean, just to elaborate on that one thing, I mean, there was one exercise we had where we wanted students to understand space, and they were first year students, so they had never designed, or they had very little inkling about what architecture is all about. So one of the exercises we did with them is that they sit and sketch out spaces, or sketch out memories of their childhood. The only condition was that when you sketch it out, don't sketch only you sitting perhaps and playing chess or playing cricket, but you draw the space around it and build a story out of it, that my summer vacation or my favorite childhood memories, or me and my friend, or my sibling growing up in a city. Those were the kind of narratives which they actually worked out, and we sneaked in that whole idea of space into it. So, I mean, also addressing Manav's question, that how do you introduce the science into it? So sometimes you just have to sneak it in. You don't say it obviously that you are trying to, pass on a message or a lesson, but you say that, okay, Bill, what are your favorite childhood memories? Can you sketch it out and put it into a story? But you draw, or not just the person, but this, the context in which that happened. So that brings about a lot of discussion later, where you can then start pointing out at how certain activities required certain types of spaces and things like that.
Right. Any more questions from the audience? I think Chavi can.
Yeah, thanks both Minaz and Disha. I think it was wonderful that both of you brought in such different aspects of storytelling into this space today. So that was wonderful. I think what was particularly interesting is that for me is that when the Pani Party story by Minaz, so that looks at water from a cultural angle, from a values angle, and the kind of conversations that it leads to are like what Minazi mentioned, were related to equity and livelihoods. And so that is the stream of thought that you mentioned, that that can be followed. And same thing, we have another story which is about water that Disha talked about, which is based on a scientific report, where she talks about, where you can have the same, you can start with water and talk about biodiversity and pollution and action. I mean, actually, you can talk about action in both of these. So I think what was wonderful to see was this transdisciplinarity of trains that one can start with a very simple theory and then go on to, and then actually can talk about action in each of these, which I thought was wonderful. And I think both these aspects are equally important for sustainability, which is also the question here. Sustainability is not just about water pollution, but it's also about sustainable livelihoods, and there's a whole spectrum that one needs to look at. And it's just wonderful that you can just start with these storybooks and take the conversation in so many different ways. So thanks for sharing. Thanks for your time. Manav, just wanted to say.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful to be invited here.
When you're doing your, when you're writing a book, you're just writing a book. But then later, when opportunities like this come, then you start thinking about how you did it and why you did it. That's what makes it so wonderful. So thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for connecting us to so many people. It was wonderful. Thank you for your time, everyone.
Yes, thank you all for joining. Thank you, Disha and Minaz, for the wonderful talk, and as Chavi mentioned, for all the different aspects that you brought forth onto the table. I would like to let the audience know that LWM will be organizing more such talks and discussions. We are active on the various social media. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter to get updates. And if you have any suggestions for more topics related to sustainability, education, or even any other topics, we'll be happy to organize, and you can let us know on the social media platforms. All right, thank you all for joining. So that will be it. You can stop recording.
Bye everyone. Good night.